Now, the biggest segment of the day, it is a Fantasy Friday, folks. Fantasy Football Friday. We just did our draft order for our Dynasty League, so I'm very excited about that. Your boy got 6th, 12th. First pick went
11th.
to
I got
11th, so that you guys are going to be jockeying for position all night.
We're good, though. I think we're like...
I mean, I'd rather be higher.
Where?
Like 1.
You'd rather have the
You
first
said you want 1, 2,
I
or
want
11
1,
or
2,
12.
11 or 12. I love picking back to
I
back.
like
Having
picking
that
back
middle,
to back,
right
too. I
down the
love it.
seam right there at 6. I mean, on a
I'll get
Dynasty
off to
League,
a good
it'll
start,
be
I
interesting.
think, if I get to pick back to back.
But anyway, so...
I'm dangerous picking back to back. I've had success.
I know. It never stops. It really doesn't.
All right, so interesting the way I'm going to break this down. I'm going to do it very similar to the way I did last week's segment where it was the fantasy players that you might want to target. This is the one where you want to avoid some players. Quarterbacks, I'm going to kind of skip over the quarterbacks, and we'll circle back to the QBs at the end because I
do
feel
have
like
a couple.
I feel like that's a whole other conversation. I'm struggling to find guys to avoid because it's the one where like everyone kind of goes where they should in the pecking order, but we'll talk about it. I'm skipping right over to running backs, and I'm going to try and avoid using guys on this list that are going to be picked after round 12, 10 or 12, because at that point, we're all talking about flyers anyway. So, starting out, I want to put a little disclosure on this one, and I'm going to say Derrick Henry is the first player that you want to avoid this year in your fantasy drafts, and it's not because I think Derrick Henry is going to completely fall off. I just think that there is some real value at some other guys, and I want to talk more about just the way the pecking order has gone the last 2 seasons in fantasy football. If you look at the guys that were drafted in the first round running backs last year, right? Mm-hmm. Saquon, CMC, even Derrick Henry,
Zeke,
a Nick Chubb. Zeke may have gone some first rounds, but even Aaron Jones late. All the running backs last year that went first round, they kind of didn't do well, right? And then you saw the guys that went mid-second round, late first round, they kind of vaulted, and there was like a new breed of running back that vaulted into the ranks last year. So with Derrick Henry's 300, he's averaged now over the course of the last 3 seasons exactly 300 carries per year, right? So
it's a lot of
300 carries per
touches.
year. And prior to last season, he came into the year with a 380 carries in the prior season in 2020. So it finally caught up to him. I wasn't a buyer. I didn't believe that it was going to catch up to him last year. I had Derrick Henry ranked really high, but I've turned the corner now because week 9 is just a terrible time to lose your guy, right? And if you have Derrick Henry, I think they're going to use him out of the gate a lot, but the wheels might end up falling off. And if they do, your season's over. So Derrick Henry is my first guy. Christian McCaffrey is the second guy, and this is just it's obvious. For the same reasons as Derrick Henry in terms of guys that you don't want to pick guys that have injury risk that high because they tend to get hurt.
How far do you think he falls?
He's going to go in the top 10. Like, no doubt. It won't be me. So Christian McCaffrey, in 2019, he had 400 plus touches. And last year he was on pace for the same yards per carry average, but he played in 7 games. In those 7 games, his totals yards per game was like 25 yards less. He had 2 touchdowns in 7 games last year as opposed to like 25 in 2019. So here all the way down to here, I'm not sure at 5'11", 200 pounds, what people are seeing that he's going to be able to withstand the full season. And then with the usage that they had when he was healthy last year was still sporadic compared to when he was the guy that was the bell cow back. And the emergence of Chuba Hubbard to maybe show that he could actually shoulder some of the load. I just can't see McCaffrey getting the ball 20, 25 times a game this year. And for him to be able to be first-round talent, that's what he's going to have to do. And stay healthy. Get him all the way out of the first round if I'm you. Nick Chubb. I love Nick Chubb.
Did you see him squat today?
Yeah.
Strongest man in the NFL.
Squatting in the offseason doesn't get you receptions during the season. So
And neither does it get you home runs before you do it at the All-Star game.
Nick Chubb has gotten the ball a lot of times in the last 3 seasons, less than Derrick Henry by a lot. But still, the usage is starting to add up. And with the quarterback controversy or the quarterback situation murky in Cleveland still, you're going to expect to see a lot of 10-man fronts, 8-man fronts, and I just think that eventually what has to happen in this league at the running back position is guys start to tail off. I'm beating a dead horse with the guys tailing off, but it makes sense. So the next guy on the list is the fat slob that is Leonard Fournette, 260 pounds. I'm sorry, he's off my draft board until I see him look better and honestly, I feel like if you are a guy that doesn't draft Fournette and someone that does, right around week 8 when Fournette gets into playing shape and he decides to take over
right,
the league,
though.
you could probably buy Fournette super low,
Playoff
and he
Lenny.
will carry you into a fantasy championship. Next guy on the list, I think this is a fairly obvious one, James Conner, right?
James Conner.
James Conner. So with the emergence of the Kyler Murray contract, I don't think that really has any bearing on the James Conner situation, but DeAndre Hopkins is out, right? So they're going to be facing a little bit more of a stacked box. I don't think anybody is really double teaming Marquise Brown.
With him, it's
I
more
don't
like
think
he was
anybody's double-teaming
he
AJ
was a
Green.
red zone guy too. So that's why everybody was.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
He's got a lot of touchdowns.
Super touchdown dependent. His yards per carry was only 3.7. Look, if you don't have 15 touchdowns, 3.7 yards a carry, you're almost out of the league. That's very Zeke-like.
Well,
It's his
he
birthday,
had
man.
blocks,
Happy
though.
birthday,
His
Zeke.
Goddamn
blocks.
birthday.
No.
Picks up blocks, you know? Come on.
All right, I'm ready with the plugs.
Look, James Conner, 3.7 yards a carry, 15 touchdowns last year. You got to imagine that number might get cut in at least in half, right? There's a potential because 7
It's a
or 8
big drop.
touchdowns, 7 or 8 touchdowns for a guy that shares carries. Essentially, I think that's a pretty reasonable expectation from a guy that what's his career total before that?
Right.
Has he ever had any even in double digits? I don't think he did. So James Conner, I think that's an easy one. Moving off of the running backs, and now we move over into the wide receivers. This one gets a little.
Let's see if you
more
have any that
difficult.
I have here. But go ahead.
A little more difficult. I really don't have any of the guys that are slated to go in the top 12, or not top 12, but top 10 receivers to 12 receivers. I feel like that's pretty safe.
Interesting.
You might want to juggle the order a little bit. And depending where you have DK Metcalf, that's the first guy on my list. So DK coming in at like 13 on average in a lot of the rankings lists that I've seen. I think that's a decent spot projected-wise, but DK, man,
If he gets good quarterback play, though,
What do you
bro,
think about DK?
in 2020, DK averaged 15 yards per catch. In 2021, with the whole Russ debacle and the quarterback situation was a little up and down all year, he averaged 12 yards per catch, right? So DK trending down, no quarterback that we know of yet. It's either going to be Geno Smith or Drew Lock. That's all we do know. Next guy on my list, I'm going to keep it in Seattle, and it's Tyler Lockett. I know Tyler Lockett is the guy that typically you would get later than average because he's a very boring player, very mundane. And prior to last year, you'll hear about why I think he's off my list, because I think finally last year he shot up and got a little respect. Previous 2 seasons prior to last season, he averaged 12.9 yards per catch and then 10 yards per catch. Last year vaulted all the way up to 16.1. So I would imagine that if we're looking at the body of work, 16.1 yards per catch last year is more the anomaly. So I think that the Seattle receivers are just going to be overdrafted this year because of their lack of a quarterback play and their system isn't set up for them to do well. Is Deontay Johnson.
Ooh,
So
he's on my list.
Deontay Johnson is an interesting one because last year there was only one player in football that got more targets than Deontay Johnson. That was Cooper Kupp. I find that to be a little bit astonishing. I know that I don't use that word often, but I was astonished.
Me too.
When I read
When
that
I hear
stat.
that.
It's
right?
deep. That's deep.
So combine that stat with the fact that he had arguably, I'm not sure where the ranks go. I think with a minimum of 110 targets or 100 targets, he had the lowest catch rate out of any receiver in the league at 63%. Some of that could be attributed to the fact that Big Ben was damn near 140 years old
Couldn't
and
throw.
wasn't really able to get the ball out and maybe hit certain deep routes, deep outs, whatever you want to say.
And now you're going from Big Ben to Trubisky / Pickett. It's like,
So
yeah,
you're probably going to get more of the same in terms of maybe not getting hit with you when you're wide open. While he got 169 targets and he only caught 63% of them, it was for a paltry 10.9 yards per catch. So you can't expect that to go up much more. I don't think Trubisky is the guy that's going to be flinging it downfield. So you're going to see a lot of the mundane intermediate routes out of Deontay Johnson. And even more disparaging towards the Deontay Johnson numbers is right around week 14, 15, the final 4 weeks of the season, which is fantasy playoffs, his yards per catch dropped all the way down to 6.6. So he wore down as the season went on, and he just wasn't. He did catch the ball a lot. I think he had 6 catches an average per game down the stretch, but six catches for 36 yards, that's not going to get it done in the fantasy playoffs. So I'm avoiding Deontay Johnson in spots. Like I won't take him as the 15th receiver off the board. But if Deontay Johnson's there after 20 guys are gone, I'm definitely going to kick the tires on Deontay because he will have volume, as pointed out by the 170 targets. Next couple
And
guys
they lost a receiver.
Next couple guys on my list, it's just like a buyer beware. We could talk ad nauseum about injuries, and we talked about it with CMC. But for that reason, I avoid Robert Woods. I avoid a Michael Thomas. I avoid what's the other guy? Odell Beckham Jr., who's we don't even know where he's going to play. So there's multiple reasons why we want to avoid him. But just a cautionary tale. You could point back to a couple guys. You could even point back to a guy on this list. Imagine drafting Michael Thomas last year with like the 8th pick, your 8th round pick, and being like, oh, he'll be back week 6, and I got like insert Michael Thomas. You're still waiting for Michael Thomas to come back.